Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today's video is the Acer Predator Triton 300. I'm going to be reviewing this notebook today, share with you some of my thoughts, things I don't like about this notebook, and if I'd recommend it. So let's watch to find out. Let's roll. All right, so I've had this notebook for the last several days, and while I was optimistic about the first impressions on this unit, I've had some reservations since, and I'm going to explain why. So looking at this unit, it has a really good design. Aesthetically, it has aluminum finish on the lid, on the deck, and even on the bottom. The only plastic material is actually along the bezel itself. The keyboard design, while it is a full-size keyboard, which I think is too much keyboard for a 15-inch, the touchpad is quite nice. The clicks in either side of the corner, while they have a lot of travel, in practice, you never really run into it, so I found it to be quite good. It is a glass precision touchpad. All the functions you normally expect all do work there. The keyboard itself is pretty tactile, actually. It responds quite well to keyboard typing, as you would expect it to. The RGB is a 4-zone RGB. I do find that the keycaps themselves have this white instead of the translucence that the WASD or the arrow keys themselves have. You just don't get as much coloring that comes through on that RGB. All right, so Acer bundles their Predator Sense with the notebook. So as you can see here, you get some temperature readouts, you get control over your lighting on your RGB, a couple settings that you can change there. You get your overclocking settings for your GPU. So this is normal, fast, and extreme. And then moving into fan control, there's not very many options here. Your custom, you can adjust your sliders for your CPU and GPU. You have your max settings, which is pretty loud. This is getting up to 64 decibels. You of course have your auto, which will ramp up as necessary. And then you have your cool boost. So this will just effectively increase the maximum speed of the fans and basically keep them just slightly higher than what auto would do. Monitoring itself, you can see temperatures. As you can see, the temperatures are fairly high. I did find that the Predator Sense, while open, it does consume about 10 to 15% on CPU, so it is a pretty intensive app for basically just monitoring. You can see our system temperature there, 54. Game Sense, so this will allow you to set different sound levels, your thermals, your GPU overclock, your sound for the speakers that are coming out of the system. So it's kind of nice. And then your app center, so you can see some of the other components are just basically shortcuts. And then of course up in the settings is where you can find your LCD overdrive. So that's a nice setting. It gets you down to that 3 millisecond response time for the panel itself. So how do the speakers sound? Well, let's take a listen. Speakers are okay. Nothing to really write home about. They're pretty tinny, lack the depth like normal kind of laptop speakers. So put on some headphones, listen to your beats, and go from there. However, all of that said, the one challenge I've had with this unit is that it is quite loud at idle. In fact, right now, the fans are spooled up, and the unit itself is quite warm. And I actually attribute this to mostly the design on the bottom. There's just very little venting, and while it does have this venting on the CPU and GPU fans, the challenge is that these slits are very small. And so I just feel like it's not getting as much air as it needs to properly cool this unit. This unit is quite hot all the time, no matter what you're doing, even if it's undervolted. So that is definitely a big strike on this unit itself. That's just the one aspect of it. Taking a look under the hood, You can see that it does have some heat pipes, but I just don't think it's enough to keep all the components cool. But enough of that. So I'd call that strike one on this unit. So this one does feature the i7-10775H, that's 6 cores, 12 threads. And it also has the NVIDIA RTX 1070. This is the Max Q edition, so you get it around that 80 to 90 watts. I've seen it go as high as 95 watts. This thing has crammed into it 32 gigs of memory, 3200 megahertz. Also features a 1 terabyte SSD NVMe, and that also includes 2 additional NVMe slots if you want to upgrade. Of course, it has killer wireless, so that's the AC1650i, Bluetooth, your gig, LAN. It also has a 58 watt hour battery, and that's all crammed into a package that's about 4.5 pounds, which is a decent weight for a laptop. Now, that being said, let's go back to the battery for a second. I said that was 58 watt hour. When I did my battery test on this unit, I was actually only able to get 1 hour of time being unplugged from the wall. That's the lowest score I've ever seen in a laptop ever. And in fact, just having this thing unplugged for the last 10 minutes, I'm sitting at 85%, just in 10 minutes, and it's literally just idling. So that's strike two against this unit. Let's see how the webcam is. So this also features a 720p camera. It is fairly grainy. It's okay, the sound quality is okay, but because this is typically ramping up its fans, especially when you're plugged in. Of course, you also have turbo mode. So let's hear what that sounds like. I feel like you'll never use turbo mode while you're talking on your webcam because it is so loud. This gets up to 64 decibels. I'm glad and thankful that it actually has a webcam. However, like most of the laptop cameras these days, it is pretty grainy. Let's get to some of the gaming benchmarks. So kicking us off, PC Mark 10. So this came in at 5259, the lowest score out of the bunch. Moving into Cinebench R20, you can see this going from 2400 all the way up to 2863. However, this being the i7-10750H, it was the lowest out of any of the 10750Hs that I've tested so far. Now, let's take a look at the temperatures. So you can see here that the temperatures themselves were actually always hitting its upper limit. 92, 92. When you see that 81 or 80, that's actually a result that it actually hit 92 and then moved all the way back down. So you can actually have that declock over time. I did undervolt the unit. I did get a negative 80 millivolt. This definitely helped the scores. However, even with undervolting, it wasn't able to dethrone some of the other 10750s I've tested before. Overall, not that great. So moving into 3D Mark. So we can see that Firestrike Extreme came at 8922 and Time Spy at 7372. Moving over to Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So max settings, ray tracing on, posted a score of 63 frames per second. Again, the lowest score that we've seen on this. Moving over to Shadow of a Tomb Raider. So I did some changing of whether overclocking the GPU from normal to extreme and seeing whether or not that would have a decent effect on score. And as you can see at normal, posting at 83 frames per second, and at extreme overclock, it only posted 88. So it only got 5 additional frames per second. And that is at turbo, which is 64 decibels. Now moving into some of the other settings as it relates to some of the sound. So 64 was the max. You could see that with some of the other settings that got down to 56. 56 decibels though is still very loud. So if you are gaming, you definitely want to over the ear headphones on. And you can see that the actual differences didn't make a big change in temperature, whether that's CPU or GPU. Now moving over to Anno 1800, this posted 85 frames per second. And in Metro Exodus, 1080p at the extreme settings, that's 31 frames per second at the top there. You can see this is right in the middle around most of the other notebooks in this category. Now heading over to Death Stranding, this came in at 73 frames per second. Forza Horizon 4 Ultra settings, 103 frames per second. And then in Flight Simulator, so whether that was in auto, cooler boost, with undervolt or in the full turbo mode, this came in at around 31 to 33 frames per second. Heading over to Red Dead Redemption 2, all ultra settings, posted a score of 46 frames per second. And in Fortnite, epic settings, the blue bar came in at 97 frames per second, and with DLSS on quality came at 127 frames per second, which was a very decent score here. Now moving into Apex Legends, max settings, 128 frames per second. So as you can see from the benchmarks, this really was one of the slower notebooks out of the bunch here. To game and get to those levels, you really had to have those fans really ramped up. And so I found that, when you're at that 56 to 64 decibels, it is unbearable. In fact, even some of the over-the-ear headphones aren't going to be able to cancel that out without having that volume pretty high. So from that perspective, to me, that is strike 3. So let's talk about final thoughts on the Acer Predator Triton 300. Throughout the video, you definitely saw there's some issues with this notebook. The fact that this is their mid-range out of all their models, I actually would hate to see what some of the more entry-level models look like, because even in this mid-tier segment, it's not able to kind of keep shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the notebooks. So what can I love about this notebook? Nothing. I am very disappointed in this model's performance. The battery performance, the noise performance, along with the GPU performance, I'm pretty disappointed. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at other notebooks in its class, for the price point, you can get far better notebooks for the value. And that's the reality here. And so I do not recommend you purchase this. I do like the chassis. The chassis is decent, but unfortunately the chassis doesn't give it any benefit. There's no thermal advantage here at all. So between the noise levels, the fact that the fans are ramped up even while idle at desktop, the fact that the noise levels when you're playing games is so loud, in my opinion, unbearable, and the fact that the performance in here lags behind most of the other notebooks in its category. This thing is unfortunately just thermally limited. I'd give this an IMO score of 4 out of 10. From my perspective, I would highly recommend getting something completely different and not get this. So that wraps up the review on the Acer Predator Triton 300. I hope that's helped. Please don't get this notebook. Please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about the video. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'd love to hear from you. So until next time, bye for now.